Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to highlight a big tip on entering large tables into the effect size calculator. So this is one of the reasons I actually like using the Excel spreadsheet over the software in some cases, because when you have a really large table within a lot of data, it's easier to enter it within the Excel sheet than to use the software HLS Meta. So we're going to use this study right here, which we've used a number of times already. You can download it via the link underneath the video, and here's our effect size calculator. So I'm going to open this up. I already created this tab and copied the rows in, assuming you've seen other videos. Otherwise, you're going to create this effect size calculations tab, and you're going to copy over these first 4 rows over, as I did here. We're going to open up the study here. And just to give a general overview again, this study used design 1, so comparison, so 2 groups, pre-test, post-test compared. So it's comparing experimental group to control group at pre-test and post-test. In this particular instance, we actually have 2 experimental groups that we're going to be comparing to the control group. So looking at this table here, we have an HIV risk reduction group, a substance use reduction group, and a standard of care control condition. So all of this data up here I'm highlighting is all given in means and standard deviations as denoted by the headlines right here, the column headings. So you're actually looking at a table where all the data is pretty uniform in how it's being reported as far as a particular statistic. So this is an instance where instead of going one by one for each comparison, so instead of making a calculator and looking at pre-test to post-test, HIV group compared to pre-test, post-test, and the control group, one calculator, and then entering all the data, and then going through the next one and entering all the data, we're actually going to kind of figure out ahead of time how many calculators you're going to need so that you can automate and copy and paste a lot of the information you're going to use as you create these calculators. So to show you an example, we're going to highlight these 3 measures at all data time points, at all comparisons. So as you can see here, there's going to be a bunch of comparisons. We're doing each group, the HIV group and the substance use group, are both going to be compared to the control group, so at a number of time points. So the HIV group is going to be compared to the control group pre to post test, to the control group pre to post test, pre to 3 month to the control pre to 3 month, and pre to 6 month to the control pre to 6 month. So that's 3 comparisons between the HIV and control group for this measure of frequency of unprotected vaginal sex, and the same 3 time point measurements for this measure are going to be compared for the substance use reduction condition to the control. So looking here, you're going to look at the pre and post in the substance use reduction group to the control pre and post, then the pre and 3 month substance use to the control pre and 3 month, and pre and 6 month to the control pre and 6 month. So within this measure, this frequency of unprotected vaginal sex, you're actually going to have a total of 6 comparisons. So each group, each experimental group, the HIV group at 3 time points, plus the substance use group at 3 time points, for a total of 6 comparisons. So seeing as it's the same amount of time points and intervention groups and comparisons for each measure, you're going to have a total of 6 comparisons for each of these measures. So frequency of unprotected vaginal sex is going to have 6 comparisons, same with number of partners, and same with number of casual partners. So looking at that, there's actually going to be, between these 3 measures we highlighted here, there's going to be a total of 18 comparisons, 6 comparisons per measure, and 3 comparisons per intervention for each measure. So what we're going to do here is open up this Excel file. And normally, as I've been showing the videos, we've been showing you a 1 by 1 comparison where we take one calculator, show you at one time point comparison. But here we're going to actually do a number of them at once, and we're going to automate a lot of this process. So like I said, there's 6 comparisons per measure. So looking at these 3 measures, there's a total of 18 comparisons. So as you can see, I've highlighted 18 rows here. So I've just copy and pasted 18 means and standard deviations design 1 calculators. I'm going to remove this border. So each set of 6 of these is going to correspond to a different measure. So the first 6 will be frequency of unprotected vaginal sex. The next 6 will be number of partners. And these final 6 will be number of casual partners. So we're going to go about this as we usually do for this first row. So the study, this arbitrary identifier, the manuscript ID we're using here is going to be CAR003. As I've said before, you may have a different identifier. This is just all going to be based on how you categorize your studies. The reference is a reference to the author and the year. All this information was copied over. So what we're going to do first here is copy all this information down, because obviously these are all from the same study. As I said, the first 6 is going to be frequency of unprotected vaginal sex to correspond with the 6 comparisons. 3 for the HIV group at each time point, and 3 for the substance use group at each of these 3 time points. The post, the 3-month, and the 6-month. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to label these measures. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 measures for that one. Now we're doing the next 6 for number of partners. We're going to copy and paste that 6 times. And then number of casual partners, which we're going to copy and paste 6 times as well. So now we have to worry about these columns. So the subgroup column. So looking at these first 6 measures, let's say we want to compare pre to post in the HIV group to the control group in this row, and then pre and post in the substance use group to the control in this row. What we're going to do is we're going to label this HIV versus control, substance use reduction versus control. The follow-up is going to be 0 because it's not a delayed follow-up. This is a post-test, immediate post-test. And same with this one, it's going to be the immediate post-test. So like I said, what we're looking at here is the pre to post in the HIV compared to the control pre-post in this row. And then looking here, substance use pre to post compared to control pre and post. And that's both for the frequency of unprotected vaginal sex measure. So moving along the table, the next comparison we're going to want to do is compare the HIV group at 3 months to the control, and then the substance use group at 3 months to the control. So since we're going HIV group comparison to substance use comparison, we can copy and paste these again. The 3-month follow-up is what we're looking at now. So both these are going to be a 12-week follow-up to correspond with 3 months. And then there's 2 frequency of unprotected vaginal sex measures left, and they're going to go in the same order as we're doing right now, which is the HIV group compared to the control group, and then the substance use reduction compared to the control. So we're going to copy and paste that. This is the 6-month follow-up we're looking at now. So we're going to type in 2 here for the second delayed follow-up. The first delayed follow-up was the 3-month. And we can copy and paste this as well. So just to run through it one more time. We're going post-test HIV and substance use compared to the control group. HIV and then substance use compared to the control at 12-week and then the 24-week. The outcome we're going to leave blank for now. We'll cover that in another video. This is not important just for the beginning steps of entering data. This column you'll use more when you develop your final database and you figure out how you want to categorize your variables and group them. And as we've said in previous videos, this is just the raw means and standard deviations. So you actually don't need to put anything in these columns because they're not controlling for any variables. And then here you're going to put where you're getting the information from, which is page 259, table 2. And just to align it so you can see it. You can actually copy that through all of these since they're all coming from the same part of the study. Now looking back at our table, so we're not even going to enter the data yet for this measure. We're going to actually enter all this descriptive data first. So looking at how we did the format of this first frequency of unprotected vaginal sex measure, you can probably see that, seeing as the table's formatted the same for each measure, so each measure is going to have the two comparisons, HIV versus control and substance use versus control, at the 3 different time points, the post-test, the 3-month, and the 6-month. So if you proceed to enter the data in the same order as we just did for frequency of unprotected vaginal sex, all of this data right here is going to be the same. The comparison and the follow-up is going to all be the same for each measure. So you can copy and paste that. As you can see now, it copies over to our next measure we're going to do, which will be the number of partners, and then number of casual partners. So looking at this quickly, you can see why this process can be better for larger tables. This is only for the first 3 measures, so imagine if we were doing this whole entire table. If you were to do this with an HLS meta, you would have to re-enter the measure multiple times and re-enter where you got it from in the table and the subgroups and the manuscript ID. So this kind of automates the process and makes it a lot easier to go through and enter a bunch of data at once. So the next thing that will be easiest to enter in this particular study is the sample sizes. Looking down here at the table, they use the same sample size for each follow-up and each time point. So baseline, post-test, 3-month, and 6-month all have the same sample size for each group. So once again, we can just enter this as we would the other measures, the previous data, which is we'll enter it all for frequency of unprotected vaginal sex. And since it's going to be the same sample size for these 2 measures, we can copy and paste that data. So the HIV risk reduction group is going to be 123 at both time points, or all time points. So as you can see, we're in the HIV row versus the control, and we're in the experimental columns. So this is the pre-test experimental N, post-test experimental N, HIV versus control here, 123 and 123 again, and 123 and 123 here. And then the substance use reduction condition is 121 at all time points. So these are the columns we left open. As you can see, they're all substance use versus control comparisons. So we're going to enter 121 in for each of those. Scroll right, we're going to want to do the control next. And the control is 110, as you can see at the bottom of the table, at all time points. So seeing as this is all control data here, and you're comparing the same control for both, we can actually just copy and paste 110 into all these cells for the pre-test N for the control and the post-test N for the control, post 3-month and 6-month. So now that you have those sample sizes entered for this measure, seeing it's the same format and the same sample sizes as other measures, you can copy and paste the sample size data for first the number of partners and then the number of casual partners. now it's time where we're going to enter the actual means and standard deviations that are reported in this table for each measure. So just to make them both visible, so we're going to start with the frequency of unprotected vaginal sex. So the first thing you can do is enter the HIV group to correspond with this row, which is going to be 14 and 31.2 for the mean standard deviation pre-test. And then this row is a substance use reduction condition, so you're going to enter the 10.8 and 22.1. So given that these sets are all the same pretest data, so you're looking at frequency of unprotected vaginal sex at different time points. So this is the post-test comparison for the HIV group, the 12-week comparison for the HIV group to the control, and the 24-week. So this data here will change depending on the follow-up, the post-test, the 3-month or the 6-month, but this data is not going to change. So this is going to be the same pre-test data for each of those. So whether you're looking here at 14 and 31.2 to the post-test, at 8.7 to 14.5, it's still going to be the same pre-test when you're looking at the 3-month of 9.5 and 23.1. You're still using this 14 and 31.2 as a pre-test data for the HIV, and the 10.8 and 22.1 for the pre-test for the substance use reduction. So once again, you can copy and paste this information here. Scrolling right, you can automate this process even more for the control group. So the control is 11.6, 25.9 at the pretest. So the pretest is going to be the same for this measure for all of the control comparisons, no matter what the follow-up. So you can actually copy and paste that data into all the cells for this measure, all 6 of them. Now what we're going to want to do is enter the follow-up data. So just to undo some highlights here to make it easier to see, we can enter the post-test for the both of them first, and then the 3-month, and then the 6-month. So we'll go in the order of HIV post-test, and then substance use post-test, HIV 3-month, substance use 3-month, HIV 6-month, substance use 6-month. So going in that order, we're going to start with the post-test, 8.7 and 14.5 for the experimental, for the HIV experimental, and then 9.4 and 22.9 for the substance use experimental, and that corresponds with the groups here, HIV and the substance use, and both of those are post-test. And the control is going to have the same post-test follow-up for both of them. You're comparing to the same post-test data point and measure for both comparisons for both experimental groups. So it's going to be the 12.1 and the 25.6. And you can copy that into both cells. Next, you're going to look here at the 3-month follow-up, which is going to correspond here. HIV group, substance use, both of those are the 3-month. So you're going to enter 9.5, 23.1, and then 8.1 and 20.3. Scroll right here, and then you can enter the control data again. Then once again, this is going to repeat because it's the same comparison for both groups for that time point. And finally, for this measure, we're going to do the 6-month follow-up. So same idea, we're going to look over here and see this data here. So it's going to be 7.2 and 14.5 in the 6 months for the HIV group, and 8.8 and 20.2 for the substance use group. And then looking at the control right here, 8 and 17.9. You can copy and paste that. So now that measure is done. And now you move on to the next measure. So we move on to number of partners. So we're going to highlight this, show you what measure we're working with. Enter the HIV and the substance use reduction pretest information first. So as you can see, it's the same format, so we're going through it the same way we just did. It's literally identical format, the way the data is entered as far as the condition comparisons at which time points. So we're looking here at the HIV pretest for number of partners. So here you can see the HIV number of partners measure. It's going to be 1.25 and 1.11. And below that is 1.41 and 1.67 to note the substance use reduction comparison at pretest. And like we said, this is post-test, 12-week and 24-week for this measure, and they go in the same order for each one: HIV use, then HIV group, and then substance use group comparison. So we can take these pretest means and standard deviations and copy them through, because it's going to be the same pretest data no matter which time the follow-up is. And then for the control, we're going to use this 1.24 and 1.12. And once again, it's the same pretest for all the control comparisons, so you can copy and paste that into all the cells for pretest for the control, because that's not going to change based on follow-up. And now we'll enter the post-test information. So we'll do that first, and then once again we'll do the 3-month after that, and then the 6-month, going in the same order: HIV, then substance for post, HIV, then substance for 3-month, HIV, then substance for 6-month. So 1.04 and 0.84, and 1.12 and 1.12 for the post test, you see right here, corresponding with this right here. And then you can take the control, which is underneath those, 1.19 and 1.29. We're going to copy and paste that below. Then we're going to look at the 3-month right here, 0.93 and 0.8 for the experimental of the HIV group. And 1.02 and 1.12 for the substance use group, which is the second row in this table. And then we can enter 1.12 and 1.16 under this 3-month column for the control at 3-month. And then we'll do the final comparison, which is the 6-month. And looking here, it's 0.97 to 0.78 for the HIV group. And 0.95 and 0.99 for the substance use reduction group. And the control group is underneath that, which is going to be 1.07 and 1.38 at 6-month follow-up. And then we completed that measure, so our last measure will be number of casual partners. If you've gotten the hang of it by now, it's literally doing the same thing as we just did, so you don't have to watch the remainder of this video if you already got the hang of it and understand the concept. But if you're still trying to help yourself automate it a bit, you can watch this last demonstration. So it's same format as the previous measure, so we'll do the pretest data first since that's going to be repeated. So 0.54, 1.05 in the HIV group, 0.63, 1.31 in the substance use reduction condition. Copy those down since they're all for the same measure pretest. And then we'll use this 0.49, 1.05 for the control pretest. And that's going to be the pretest for all the control group time points because it's all for the same measure. And then we'll go through here and we'll enter the post-test 3-month and 6-month data. So that's post-test, HIV then substance use, 3-month HIV then substance use, 6-month HIV then substance use, and then underneath each of those is the control data point for that time point. So we'll do the post-test first. It's right here, 0.28, 0.6 for HIV, 0.38, 0.79 for the substance use, 0.52, 1.21 for the control. Copy and paste that to repeat since it's the same control comparison for each of these at post-test. Then we're going to do 0.21, 0.57 for the HIV group at 3-month, and 0.33 and 0.93 for the substance use group at 3-month, and then 0.47, 0.97, looking over here, looking at the control group at 3-month, and that's going to be the same for both comparisons. And then finally, the 6-month follow-up, 0.3, 0.58 for the experimental, the HIV experimental, 0.3, 0.67 for the substance use reduction, and then the control, which is underneath that, 0.48 and 1.19 for the control. You can copy and paste that. And then you'll have all your effect size information. You can look at the other videos for a brief explanation of that, but if you've gotten this far, you probably understand the basic concept of how the effect sizes work and the direction of them and what they all mean and how to interpret them. So these cells highlighted here are all effect size information for the experimental pre-post. This data here for the control pre-post, and this data here for the experimental versus the control effect size.